Days after ESPN fired Ryan Clark, reports surfaced that Pat McAfee could soon be making up to $60 million a year from the same network. Ryan Clark has finally reacted, and what he's saying is making ESPN's handling of his firing look even worse. Let me catch you up. Ryan Clark didn't get a phone call. He didn't get a meeting. He found out he was done at ESPN while the cameras were rolling on him. According to The Athletic, he was informed he was being let go while appearing on Monday's edition of NFL Live, and he did not return to finish the program. The plan had actually been to tell him privately the next morning. ESPN reportedly planned to tell Clark that he was let go on Tuesday morning, in line with other layoffs. But media inquiries had led the network to fear that Clark would find out he was fired online before it had a chance to tell him. So instead of a private conversation, Clark got pulled off a live national broadcast and told it was over. Think about that for a second. 11 years at the network, a Pro Bowl safety, a Super Bowl champion, one of the most recognizable NFL voices on ESPN's air, and he finds out he's unemployed, sitting in the chair, cameras pointed at his face, mid-show. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for ESPN. At the exact same moment Clark was getting cut, the network was deep in negotiations to make Pat McAfee the highest paid personality in the building. A post circulating on X claims ESPN is preparing to pay Pat McAfee more than $60 million annually while laying off other employees. And the salary claim stems from a report published by Andrew Marchand in June, which noted that ESPN and McAfee were discussing an extension worth between $60 million and $65 million per year. $60 million. Compare that to what Clark was making. Clark was reportedly earning over $2 million a year with the worldwide leader in sports. That's not a gap, that's a canyon. And it's the reason this story didn't just stay a media business footnote. It turned into a talking point across every football timeline within a day. The internet noticed immediately, and it wasn't kind to ESPN's optics. NFL influencer Dov Kleiman posted the news bluntly, calling it breaking. ESPN has fired longtime analyst Ryan Clark, and followed it by calling the move a long overdue decision. Bleacher Report's Thomas Peterson framed it around Clark's on-air habits, writing that Ryan Clark had a lot of weird takes, but saying the Cowboys are Super Bowl contenders was the final straw that got him canned. And a third account, Virginia Betts, tied it straight back to ESPN's larger pattern, asking, are they realizing that pushing an agenda and having truly bad takes is not good for business? Three completely different reactions. One says overdue. One ties it to a specific take gone wrong. One turns it into a commentary on the network itself. But all three land on the same theme. Nobody was shocked Clark got cut. And everybody was talking about the money that stayed on the table for someone else. Because here's the layer that made this story explode instead of just fade into another media layoff cycle. The timing lined up almost too perfectly. He was abruptly informed of his layoff on Monday, July 20, 2026, while he was in the middle of taping NFL Live. That same broadcast, minutes earlier, Clark had gone on record with a prediction that immediately became the punchline of his own firing. He publicly claimed that the Dallas Cowboys could be legitimate Super Bowl contenders. Fans jumped on the timeline instantly. One posted, "Dude got fired right after saying this," laughing through the caption. Another called it cold-blooded, ha 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 ha. A third added, "Him losing the job isn't funny, but the caption got me." So you had a guy getting axed on live TV, seconds after making a take that instantly became a meme, while across the building executives were finalizing a deal that would make one of his coworkers the best paid voice in sports media history. That's the collision this whole story is built on. And it's not like the $60 million number was some rumor floating without a source. NBC Sports laid out the actual reporting plainly. On Tuesday, a number surfaced. Andrew Marchand reports that the new deal would pay McAfee more than $60 million per year. The same outlet didn't hold back on what that number actually means in football terms, calling it franchise quarterback money, adding, "Hell, it's nearly NFL commissioner money." Meanwhile, ESPN framed Clark's exit as business as usual. Front Office Sports reported plainly that Ryan Clark had been laid off after more than a decade at ESPN, and an ESPN spokesperson declined to comment. No statement, no farewell tribute, nothing beyond a network staying quiet while online reaction filled the silence for them. That's the setup. A guy with over a decade of tenure, a Super Bowl ring, and millions of viewers who knew his voice, gone mid-broadcast. And in the same news cycle, a number climbing towards $60 million for someone else's show. This is where Clark's reaction, and the reaction of everyone watching this unfold, actually starts. To understand why this firing landed the way it did, you have to understand what Clark actually built at that network over more than a decade. He didn't walk into ESPN as some outside hire looking for a broadcasting career. Clark began appearing on ESPN while still playing in the NFL and became a full-time ESPN personality following his retirement from football after the 2014 season. Before that, on the field, he was the kind of player teams built trust around. Undrafted in 2002, Clark signed with the Steelers in 2006 and paired perfectly with Troy Polamalu, spending 8 years in Pittsburgh and starting on the team's 2008 Super Bowl winning squad. Once he moved to the desk, he didn't just fill a chair. Clark was an analyst on Monday Night Countdown, as well as a regular on studio programming, including Get Up, First Take, and NFL Live. That's 4 major properties. Not many analysts get spread across that much of a network's football coverage. He wasn't a rotating guest. He was structural to how ESPN covered the NFL every single week. And beyond the desk, he had his own thing going that had nothing to do with ESPN's paycheck. He also hosted his Pivot podcast, which had become wildly popular with over 1.4 million subscribers. That's a built-in audience, independent of the network, that he could take with him anywhere. But tenure and reach don't buy you total security. Money had already been a flashpoint between Clark and ESPN once before. In 2024, the two sides had contentious contract negotiations, and Clark posted on social media at the time that he felt he deserved more, and ESPN disagreed. Ultimately, the two sides agreed to a deal. That detail matters more now than it did back then. Here's a guy who already had to fight publicly to get what he thought he was worth. Settled for a deal reportedly worth just over $2 million a year, and then watched the network turn around and float a number 30 times higher for someone else's show. If there was ever a moment for old frustration to resurface, this was it. There were also cracks that had nothing to do with money. Reporting from The Athletic pointed to a specific breaking point behind the scenes. ESPN soured on Clark after last year's televised interaction with Peter Schrager, during which Clark dismissed Schrager's opinion as the viewpoint of a non-player. Clark later apologized for his on and off the air interactions with Schrager. Front Office Sports had actually flagged this months in advance. Last September, FOS reported that Clark could be on thin ice at ESPN after a series of apologies, including an on-air tiff with Peter Schrager during an episode of Get Up that was later resolved. So this wasn't some sudden executive decision made in a vacuum. There was a paper trail of friction building for nearly a year before the axe actually fell. And the reporting suggests ESPN had been quietly circling this decision for even longer than that. Marchand's sources told him that Clark's job could be in jeopardy since February, and the news of his layoff was labeled likely last week. The original plan was to part ways with Clark on the morning of July 21. So this wasn't really about one bad take on the Cowboys, even though that's the moment the internet grabbed onto. This was months of accumulated tension, a contract fight in the past, an on-air blow-up with a colleague, growing internal doubts about his fit, that all came to a head at the exact moment ESPN was trying to lock down its biggest financial commitment in company history for someone else entirely. There's also a harder layer to Clark's ESPN tenure that's worth putting on the table, because it shaped how the internet reacted to his firing before McAfee's number ever entered the conversation. Sage Steele alleged in her lawsuit against the network that Clark refused to work with her on air, and over the past year he generated headlines for criticizing Robert Griffin III over his marriage to a white woman. An on-air exchange with Peter Schrager that reportedly continued off-air, and disputed claims about police. Heavy.com summed up how a chunk of the audience actually experienced his run in recent years, writing that there was little Clark added to ESPN's broadcasts in terms of value in recent years. But he did plenty to keep people at home, cringing at his terrible takes on football and ultra-uncomfortable on-air moments. That's the split screen. On one side, a guy with a genuine broadcasting resume, 4 major shows, a sports Emmy, a podcast empire on his own terms. On the other side, a pile of incidents that made him one of the more polarizing figures on the network's roster. Both of those things were true about Clark at once, and both of them fed directly into why his firing became a bigger story than a routine contract, non-renewal. None of that erases the moment that most people still associate with his best work on air. Among other on-camera moments, Clark was praised for his handling of the life-threatening Damar Hamlin injury, saying at the time, "I think the first thing, This is about Damar Hamlin. It's about a young man at 24 years old that was living his dream, that a few hours ago was getting ready to play the biggest game of his NFL career. And there's probably nowhere else in the world he wanted to be. And now he fights for his life. That's the range of the guy who just got shown the door mid-broadcast. Capable of some of the most human moments in sports television history, and also capable of the friction that eventually cost him his job. Now let's get into the other half of this story. Because $60 million doesn't just appear out of nowhere. And understanding how McAfee got there is exactly what makes the contrast with Clark's exit sting even more. McAfee didn't walk into ESPN as a broadcasting lifer either. He came in as a former punter with a growing independent show, and the deal structure from the start was different from almost anyone else at the network. Right now, it's a huge step up from where McAfee currently sits. ESPN licenses his show for a reported $17 million per year, and then pays McAfee an additional $13 million or so for his work on College Game Day, various altcasts, and other ancillary assignments. That licensing structure is the key detail everyone skips past. This isn't a normal talent contract like Clark's was. The McAfee situation is unique compared to normal talent contracts. ESPN licenses the Pat McAfee show, and that licensing fee is used to compensate the entire production team, from McAfee's fellow on-air talents to the staffers who handle the show's audio. So to say McAfee himself is prepared to sign a $60 million per year contract is a bit misleading, since much of that money funds the show. Still, even accounting for that, the raw number dwarfs everyone else on the roster. To put that into perspective, First Take star Stephen A. Smith nets about $20 million per year from ESPN, while the Monday Night Football booth of Joe Buck and Troy Aikman earn about $15 million and $17.5 million per year, respectively. McAfee was already sitting well above most of the network before any extension talk even started. And the negotiation itself didn't start modest. While he negotiated his current deal himself 3 years ago, Pat McAfee now has TKO WME executives Ari Emanuel and Mark Shapiro representing him, and sources noted that they began their proposal with a starting request of $100 million per year to gain leverage. That's not a typo. $100 million as an opening ask. NBC Sports broke down the math behind that number, explaining that McAfee's agents reportedly made an opening ask of $100 million per year, which suggests that ESPN was likely in the range of $40 million with its opener, and ESPN had room to move into the $60 million range. So this wasn't a case of ESPN volunteering to hand over a fortune. It was a negotiation that started at triple digits and settled somewhere ESPN could live with, which still ended up being triple what its other top guy makes. Why would ESPN even entertain that kind of number? Leverage. McAfee's team wasn't just negotiating with ESPN in a vacuum. Chances are that McAfee's reps were already getting feelers as to what others, like Amazon or Netflix, would pay to snatch his show away from ESPN, which forced ESPN to move before McAfee got close enough to his expiration date, to strike a deal to make another jump to a new operation. And the ratings case, while not overwhelming on traditional television, tells a different story once you look at where McAfee's audience actually is. From a purely linear television viewership perspective, McAfee doesn't move the needle enough to make paying him the largest talent salary at ESPN make a ton of sense. His TV audiences come in well below the lead-in program, First Take, usually by a substantial margin. Of course, much of McAfee's audience watches his show on YouTube and other digital platforms, which ESPN likes to note in press releases about the show. That's the trade ESPN is making. Less strength on the traditional dial, more strength on the platforms where younger audiences actually live. And the network apparently believes that's worth building its highest paid contract around, even as it lays off long-time, recognizable linear TV first talent like Clark in the same stretch. The timing made this look even worse for ESPN's public image. The timing of the news of McAfee's impending contract extension becoming public couldn't have been worse for ESPN. Just days prior to the McAfee news crossing the wire, a separate report about impending layoffs at ESPN was published. Put those two headlines next to each other, and you get exactly the reaction that followed. A network cutting a decade-plus veteran mid-broadcast, while simultaneously trying to close the largest media talent contract in sports TV history. For a guy who joined the company far more recently, and negotiated leverage from an outside empire, not a locker room resume. Once the McAfee number and the Clark firing collided in the same news cycle, the reaction inside ESPN's own talent pool became part of the story. And nobody's response carried more weight than Stephen A. Smith's. Smith has his own history tangled up with McAfee, and it's not all smooth. The two were reportedly involved in an off-air blow-up in 2024 over creative differences on a Smith-produced project. Smith addressed it days later on his own show, calling McAfee a trailblazer he felt gratitude toward, not someone he had friction with. When the tension rumors came back around later that year, Smith dismissed them as a flat-out lie, even though McAfee hasn't made a weekly First Take appearance since, a rotation he'd kept up throughout his first year at the network. So when McAfee's looming $60 million number went public, Smith didn't stay quiet, and he didn't just praise it blindly either. Stephen A. Smith praised Pat McAfee's looming ESPN contract as deserved, while questioning whether a black personality in the same position would have ever been offered the same path to it. That's a significant thing for one of ESPN's own top earners to say publicly. About another top earner's deal, Smith laid out his own position in blunt terms. He acknowledged the business reality of it directly, saying, "I'm certainly positioned to capitalize off of that. Make no mistake, I will be, but I definitely think along those lines, business is business." Then he went further, crediting McAfee's track record outright. He's earned it with a multitude of things that he has done. "I've been incredibly successful in linear. He's incredibly successful in streaming. The future is there. And I think that's incredibly important." That's notable because Smith isn't some outsider commenting on ESPN's payroll. Smith has his own experience landing a 9-figure ESPN contract, having signed a 5-year deal worth more than $100 million last spring. After crediting McAfee's arrival and the salary ceiling his deal pushed upward, with clearing the path for his own number. In other words, McAfee's rising price tag isn't just about McAfee. It's resetting what everyone else at the network can ask for. Everyone except, apparently, the people getting laid off in the same news cycle. Awful announcing broke down the argument from the skeptical side too, framing the core tension plainly. Whether ESPN would be better off just building its own talent instead of importing an outside empire at premium price. The question is whether ESPN would be better off investing $60 million per year to develop its own homegrown talent that could rise to McAfee-esque levels within the demographics it desires. Such an investment would be far from a guarantee, but the issue with the Pat McAfee show is that it's a rental. ESPN is leasing it, and there's no certainty it'll be around if the network still needs it. That single line, "it's a rental," captures exactly what stung about Clark's exit for a lot of viewers. Clark wasn't a rental. He'd been there over a decade, built his reputation inside the building, won an Emmy doing it, and he still got shown the door mid-broadcast, while the network scrambled to secure a deal for someone whose show it doesn't even own. The wrestling world added its own footnote to the McAfee side of this story, since his contract talk arrived just as he stepped away from another major commitment. The reported terms land between $60 million and $65 million per year, roughly double McAfee's current ESPN package of about $30 million, and his existing deal runs through 2028, so ESPN is paying up to extend early rather than risk a bidding war. That outlet summed up the calculation from ESPN's side bluntly. For ESPN, locking him down before rival network circles is the priority. The wrestling chapter was a detour. The media deal is the destination. Every one of these voices, Smith weighing race and business in the same breath, outside analysts calling the McAfee show a rental, wrestling insiders framing it as a defensive money move, points to the same underlying truth. ESPN isn't just handing McAfee money because he's popular. It's protecting an asset it doesn't fully control. In a media landscape where streaming platforms are circling every valuable name in the building, Clark, by contrast, was fully theirs, owned outright, easy to cut without a bidding war to worry about. So where does this actually leave things? For Clark, the immediate reality is that he's not the only name getting cut. Ryan Clark is being let go by ESPN after more than 11 years with the network, and he's explicitly described as the opening move in something bigger. The Athletic's Andrew Marchand was first to report the news, posting that ESPN cut ties with Ryan Clark as the first part of broader layoffs that are expected tomorrow. Front Office Sports confirmed the same framing, noting that his departure marks the beginning of a round of ESPN layoffs that are expected to take place this week. And it's not just talent on camera. There are expected to be a small number of layoffs of on-air personalities based at ESPN headquarters in Bristol, Con, as well as a larger number of employees, both on and off the air, from NFL Network, tied to ESPN's acquisition of NFL Network and other assets in February. A deal valued at around $3 billion. This is a company-wide restructuring, and Clark just happened to be the face that got caught in it first, on camera, in the worst possible way. What makes the loss sting more for ESPN's coverage plans is the role Clark was supposed to play in the network's biggest upcoming broadcast. Clark was expected to be a large part of ESPN's Super Bowl LXI coverage, since ESPN is televising the game for the first time. Instead, he's among the first wave of ESPN layoffs. The network is now scrambling to fill that hole. Sources say ESPN is considering both internal and external candidates to replace Clark on its Super Bowl studio coverage. As for what Clark does next, he's not walking away from media entirely. He's already got infrastructure built outside ESPN's walls. He also could continue hosting his Pivot podcast, which has become wildly popular with over 1.4 million subscribers. He's also got television experience elsewhere that doesn't depend on ESPN's approval. He's previously made appearances on other networks, hosting Inside the NFL on the CW. Front Office Sports even floated the landscape of who might come calling, noting that Fox, ESPN, and Netflix have emerged as likely suitors for talent displaced in this wave of media shakeups. Meanwhile, the McAfee side of this story is still unresolved on paper. Pat McAfee's potential new $60 million per year deal with ESPN isn't finalized yet, and Yahoo Sports confirmed the same holdup, noting McAfee's deal hasn't closed, with his representatives, TKO Endeavor's Ari Emanuel and Mark Shapiro, opening negotiations above $100 million per year before talks settled into the current range. Whatever number it lands on, it's already reshaping expectations across the building. Once the deal is done, look for reports to eventually emerge regarding Stephen A. Smith's contract too. There's a rivalry there, and when one sets a new bar, the other will try to beat it. Once the new deal is done, that bar will be higher than ever. That's the part of this story that isn't going away. Every time McAfee's number moves, it resets the ceiling for everyone left standing in that building, while the people getting cut, like Clark, are the ones absorbing the cost of ESPN clearing room for it. The math itself explains a lot. A show like ESPN's morning program, Get Up, costs somewhere between $30 million and $40 million per year to produce, including talent contracts, production and staffing, which means paying $60 million per year for all of Pat McAfee. Doesn't look so out of whack once you factor in what replacing him with a comparable in-house operation would actually cost. But numbers on a spreadsheet don't soften how this looked from the outside. A guy who bled for that network for over a decade, who talked the league through one of its most harrowing on-air moments with Damar Hamlin, who won an Emmy doing this job, got pulled off a live shot and told it was over, while the building next door was finishing paperwork on the richest deal in the network's history for someone else's show. Clark's ESPN chapter is closed. McAfee's next chapter is still being negotiated, and whatever number that contract eventually lands on, it's going to keep getting measured against the guy who got shown the door mid-broadcast to help make room for it. Sources: bombshell report reveals ESPN's massive plans for Pat McAfee after Ryan Clark firing. Yardbarker: bombshell report reveals ESPN's massive plans for Pat McAfee after Ryan Clark firing. Total Pro Sports: report ESPN cuts ties with Ryan Clark. NBC Sports: report ESPN cuts ties with Ryan Clark. Yahoo Sports: ESPN parting ways with NFL analyst Ryan Clark ahead of network's first Super Bowl broadcast outkick. Report ESPN: Pat McAfee are discussing an extension worth more than $60 million per year. NBC Sports: the math behind Pat McAfee's $60 million ESPN deal explained. Huddle Up: the case for and against Pat McAfee's $60 million ESPN deal. Awful announcing. Stephen A. Smith: Pat McAfee earned looming record deal. Yahoo Sports: Stephen A. Smith: Pat McAfee earned looming record deal. Awful announcing. Pat McAfee nears a $60 million ESPN extension weeks after walking away from WWE Wrestling World. Pat McAfee negotiating massive $60 million contract extension with ESPN. Report Yahoo Sports: leak of Ryan Clark's ESPN ouster forced his removal mid-broadcast. Awful announcing. Ryan Clark was informed of his firing during Monday's NFL Live, NBC Sports. ESPN reportedly lays off analyst Ryan Clark during broadcast of NFL Live, Yahoo Sports. Didn't see this coming. Long overdue decision. NFL world has mixed reactions to ESPN firing Ryan Clark. Pro Football Network. Former Commanders starter fired by ESPN after 11 years. Heavy.com. Internet sleuths noticed Ryan Clark was fired by ESPN after saying the most ridiculous thing about the Dallas Cowboys. Total Pro Sports. Report: ESPN fires Ryan Clark in latest round of layoffs. Steelers Depot. Ex-Steelers Super Bowl champion laid off from ESPN mid-show. Report: Heavy.com. ESPN. Layoffs begin with Ryan Clark. Front office